when I was trying to think about experiences that have happened to me for this documentary, the one that kind of stuck out to me was just like, it's not a small thing, but it like affected me quite a lot. Was I was walking a few years ago. I was walking to my friend's house, and was walking up the street like 5 minutes away from my house where I grew up, and I was just, my mum was just have like listening to music, and then I heard like this big like whoosh of like music like blaring out of like a car, and it was a main road, so I didn't think anything of it. And then all of a sudden I just felt like these hands like go to grab my like arm, and then I just jumped back out of like reaction, and I just felt like I was like, what's happened? Like, oh my god. And then like I turned and looked to my right, and it was just a bunch of like workies in a van like pissing themselves laughing, and they thought it was the funniest thing in the world. And I was just like, what? I was just so like in shock and a bit like confused as to what happened, because it happened really quickly, that I was just like, oh god, like that's nothing, it's fine. But like I constantly now have like one headphone like not in the ear like that's closest to the road, and like watch how far I am from the road just in case that someone grabs me, which is wild. Like normally you'd like go like less close to the road like in case a car hits you, rather than like the fear that someone's going to grab you. And it's just the fact that like a guy thought that was funny to do to like a young girl, because it was when I was about 16, and nobody should ever feel like walking even like anywhere is unsafe, but walking like near your house where like it's a place where like you grew up and ran about as a kid, like now even like I carry about a rape alarm with me everywhere I go, but I don't like I've never luckily never had to use it. I've had moments where I've had my hand on it in case I needed to use it because I've been scared, but like I've never had to use it. But I don't know what I'll do if I like when that happens, because now when you think about it, it's like when will it happen rather than it might happen, which is quite scary.
So I'm 24, I live in Edinburgh, and I've lived here for the past 7 years. When I was travelling, was raped quite badly, shall we say, when I was away on holiday, and it, you know, it really affected me. And I was basically walking home from a night out, and I had my headphones on. So when these sort of things came up online and they were like, oh, she was just walking home, oh, she had her headphones on, I was like, that was me. And yeah, I was, you know, I was raped, I was sexually assaulted, and there have been other circumstances of that, but I was like, that was me. And yes, I was raped. I wasn't just raped, but at least I'm here. One of the things when I've ever talked to people about it was the act itself is awful. The entire experience is awful. You have flashbacks. You're, you know, these things make you very uncomfortable. You can either shy away from it or learn to accept and move on and try your best to get back out at doing your life. But the thing that I find is most important to sort of putting me off or feeling like I can't speak out, or you know, I don't feel comfortable to, is the sort of aftermath of it. So you've gone through this horrible experience where, you know, it's generally lonely. In the moment, it's violent and uncomfortable, and then afterwards you feel guilty and ashamed and disgusting. I actually ended up washing myself with bleach because I was so uncomfortable with myself. It was so stressful for me. I felt so alone, and all I experienced after that was, I went to the doctor, and where are the marks? You know, where are your bruises? I was like, well, I was wearing a jacket, so it was a puffy jacket. It was cold, so there was no physical marks. Oh right, okay, and you know, I'll do your swab. And I was like, no, thank you. I didn't want anybody close to me. It was more the insensitivity around it and the inability to express that apart from when you're on your own, you know, grieving over this horrible experience that you've had. It was the reaction to it. Oh, what were you wearing? You know, oh, why were you walking there when you were drunk and you were coming home? Shouldn't have had your headphones on. These things, it's really, I had to spend a lot of time sitting with myself and trying to accept that it wasn't my fault, because none of these things that I'd done were the cause of it. It was, the person was a rapist. The person was a horrible person. There was nothing that I could have done to save myself.
Well, I'm a 22-year-old woman that work in a bar. I'm from Edinburgh. It was a nice relationship. It was a short relationship, and then when it ended, it was probably for him. It was straight off killing himself, turning up at my door, messaging my friends, making fake accounts to get in contact with me. Like, I'd be scared to walk home because I'd phone my dad walking home, because I'd be like, oh, what do I do if he's outside and is like distressed as shit? I felt so guilty, because then I was just like, oh, then it'd be on me.
I'm 27, I'm from Edinburgh, I'm a hairdresser. I was in a nightclub once in Edinburgh, and we were on a Christmas night out, so we'd all had a few drinks, and the table next to us, they were chatting away to us. They tried to join our table. We were being friendly, and these men were middle-aged, like 50 upwards, and I got up to leave the table, and one of them tried to kiss me, so I had to say no, kind of backed off. He didn't like that. He pushed me against a wall and said that I was in the wrong, said that I had embarrassed him, I was asking for it, and that, pretty much kind of started shouting at me, pinned me up against the wall so I couldn't get away. Luckily, my friends seen it, so they kicked up a fuss, and we managed to get the bouncers over, and they got asked to leave, but it took a while, and then after that I just went straight home. I got my friend to pick me up. Didn't really want to be in that environment anymore, and I've not went back to that club since.
Catcalling, I feel, has been very normalised. There's been more of a narrative about it more recently, on social media mostly. It's where you see more of a rise of narrative about it and sort of speaking out about it. However, it's still very normalised within society. I've personally been catcalled multiple times, from van windows, walking past in the street. It's very normalised, and around me I noticed that a lot of people's perception of that was more, well, don't say anything, it's not really my place to say, or is it my place to say? It's much more normalised. It's uncomfortable though, and I think women have more of a narrative between themselves about it, whereas I don't think it's sort of a lads conversation. They don't really see, I mean, some people do, but there's less of a problem in that realm, whereas with us, we're well aware of it. One of my ex-boyfriends contacted me and apologised, and it was to do with an incident where I'd been catcalled and I felt uncomfortable, and I'd spoken to him about it, and at the time, this was maybe a couple of years ago, he had said, oh, you should really take that as a compliment. And it absolutely infuriated me, of course, because it made me feel really, really uncomfortable. So I left the place where we were having a drink and went off, and I was very angry, so I left. And this caused a riff, and I had to sort of explain it to him. And even at the time, he couldn't quite get it. He couldn't really understand it. And then when these sorts of things come out, why does it have to be the most severe thing to happen? When actually they could just listen to us in the first place.
I feel like just generally in the street, the worst ones smile. I always think if someone says to you, like, oh, smile, worst being, oh, like someone saying to someone I know, like, oh, I want to rape her.
I think it's a form of power that people like to have over women. Like, I do think they feel like it gives them a sense of masculinity.
When you look at men's violence against women and girls, domestic abuse is it's a badge of shame for our country. My name is Graham Goulden, and for 30 years I was a police officer in Scotland. The last 8 years of my policing career, I was a chief inspector working with the Scottish Violence Reduction Unit. And it was in those last years that I became really passionate about the prevention of violence, not just for the short term, but for the long term. Violence, in Scotland we believe violence isn't inevitable, it's totally preventable. Prevention of any issue will start in a community. So I think the first step for me was, one, to look at my role as a man, but also to acknowledge we have an issue here. We have far too many people, far too many women and girls ordering their daily lives for fear of being a victim of gender-based violence.
I actually have a tactic, and I was telling this, it was really interesting. I was telling a friend about this. It was a male friend, and I was saying that one of my tactics when walking up a high street or somewhere with shops around and it's dark, I'll actually use the shop window to gauge if anyone's behind me. So what I'll do is I'll use the reflection so I can see myself, and then I can also see the person if there is somebody behind me, which has actually helped me in a situation where I was being followed, because it's a perfect example of you can't even look behind you. There's otherwise you'd seem paranoid. But actually, in this particular circumstance, it saved me and made sure that I didn't take the right turn to my house. I went into a public place and waited until he had left.
With my boyfriend now, he'll make sure text me as soon as you're home. I've never had that before.
We've always kind of had it built into us, we have to maybe walk with our keys between our hands, or we've always kind of had to have that for ourselves. It's never been women have always had to look out for themselves. If anyone should be walking down the road, we were the ones that had to be careful.
When it comes to violence, we need to sweat the small stuff. And what I mean by that is we need to, focus on language and words. Society looks at that as the small stuff. For victims and survivors, that's not small, it's big stuff. But society sees the words, the jokes, the banter as the small stuff. That's where we need to focus on. If we're going to really see big reductions in violence and abuse, that's where we need to focus our efforts on. Violence and abuse will evolve, it will continue, and we have interruption. And for me, part of that is the active bystander, but that for men, that's men just speaking up as friends and speaking to their friends about what's been said, what's going on in the media, and just trying to share their knowledge and share their wisdom around these issues.
Especially if you're in a group of pals, the amount of people from school, just because they've been friends with someone for so long, it's okay. I'd rather stay friends with the person than call them out. So I think taking accountability for you and your peers' actions.
For men in particular, we have this destructive influence of our peers where a lot of men wrongly perceive what their friends think. They wrongly perceive that their friends support sexist views, misogynistic comments, whereas the reality they don't. And there's some men who do commit violence and abuse, they think they're doing so with the support of their friends and peers. So I think one thing we can all do as men is to just move through our discomfort. We're not having, this work isn't to put men down, it's to lift men up, to help men. And we'll actually help men in their own relationships. And I think for men watching this, lean into these issues. Think about the women in your lives, even your mums, your aunties, your grannies. They're victims of some men's violence. And, that should be something that you should be concerned about. For far too long, women are ordering their daily life, something I don't do. I was running this morning. I don't go out in fear of being a victim of assault, but I know girls and women that I care about do. And we need to, I think, as men, understand that. We are living, it might not seem that, but we are living in a time of history where we are pretty safe. Rates of violence are coming down. But we need to acknowledge how women feel around these issues. And I remember after Sarah Everard, this lady was interviewed on television, and she said something which really resonated with me. I'm scared of men. As guys, are you not ashamed of that? That half our population are scared of us?